So you've prepared, you've made the recording. The question is now what do you do with it? So these are the making the recording available questions and the post-production issues. So what does happen afterwards? What should we do with this file that we have, assuming it's a digital recording?
Well, the simplest approach, of course, is to do nothing. Simply take it the way it is. That has obvious problems connected with it because what you're going to get in your recording is everything from the moment you turn the camera on to the moment you turn the camera off. Assuming that you want to provide something which is a little more professional than that, it's a simple matter to perform some sort of editing on it. The simplest being, of course, topping and tailing, which is just cutting away the stuff before the beginning of the lecture and cutting away the stuff after the end of it. Moving beyond that, as Terry had mentioned earlier, it's not a bad idea to do further editing because you can eliminate gaffes, hiccups, noises, repetitions, long errors in the lecturing. You can pare it down to its most useful components.
Yeah.
And of course, at the same time, you can break it up into chunks and increase the navigability of the material.
It doesn't have to have the same duration as the lecture itself. You have to remember that your students have a limited amount of time to execute their studies, and therefore if it could be condensed into half its length to cover the key points that you wish the students to remember, perhaps emphasising certain points that often come up as problem areas in exams, then you may have actually achieved your academic goal for recording the lecture. So time spent on the cutting room floor really is paid back by the student attention time that you'll gain afterwards.
And if you've got issues such as the fact that it was a dark lecture theatre or the sound wasn't as good as it might have been, are there techniques to deal with this?
You can improve things to a limited extent, but you have to realize that whenever you employ some sort of a tool, to sharpen the image or to reduce the noise or something like that, you inevitably pay a price somewhere else. So the standard rule of thumb in any sort of audio or video recording is you try and capture things in as pristine a quality as you can. And because if you want to degrade your material later on, that's easy to do. But taking degraded material and making it better is a bit of a problem. I would say one other thing about editing, and that is, of course, the other obvious advantage to editing is that it does allow you to incorporate slides into the video. Yeah. And if you know you're going to do that, you don't have to point your camera at the screen, which means A, you can worry about getting a good image of the lecture, and B, just the finished result will just look so much better.
Yeah. Is there any particular tools or technology that's commonly used for this, or will it depend very much on what's available at the time and what you're trying to achieve in particular?
I think the state of video editing on computers has reached a point where it's quite simple to find quite a wonderful program to do editing on without any great difficulty. There tend to be sort of three levels of editors. You're at the lowest level you have editors, the sorts of programs where you upload your holiday videos and some snaps and you push a button and it creates something. And these things always have funny names like Schlep or Schmooze or funny things like that. I think Animoto, I think that's one of them. The next level up are what I think of as mashup editors, which are ones that you can edit, but it's quite a limited capability. You maybe have a soundtrack and a video track, and maybe you can add one other video track on top, and that's about it. But moving above that to editors, you can get very expensive editors if you want. You can go for an Avid system or something like that. But even systems like Adobe Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro have inexpensive versions of them. I think Adobe Premiere Elements, Final Cut Express, which are very, very good for working with this kind of stuff. And also there are free and open source editing systems available online as well. And we have a new document coming out at JISC Digital Media in a couple of weeks, in fact, about free editors, including online editing systems. Just a little plug there.
Excellent. And there's I suppose the question of format in terms of like I don't know from this, is it an MP4 that it comes out as?
Yes, that's an MP4 QuickTime file that one records in.
Yeah. Does it matter? Should I just stick the files from this up into a directory and tell the students off you go and get them?
I think that depends on your students, to be quite honest. There is no one comprehensive answer for formats. One of the nice things about editing systems, another nice thing about editing systems these days, is that you're not limited to one format, or creating more than one format becomes quite simple. I can take some files, and if I want to make an AVI version of it and an H.264 version of it and a 3G version, and something that I can put on a mobile that's low res and something that's super duper high res, that's fine. You can just spit out as many versions of it as you want.
And there's a balance here. It may be that what you need to achieve is a fairly rapid turnaround. So maybe the most advanced and expensive tool is really available to you, but you really don't have the time to use it. You want that lecture out within a week, and therefore you're going to use what's available to you so that students by the end of the week can see it to review it before the next weekly event.
A common question that I know that we both get is, and maybe yourself as well, that in order to comply with legislation, previously the Disability and Discrimination Act, now the Equality Act 2010, do we have to get a transcription done of the video? Is it illegal to put up video without transcription? Is it illegal to put up video without closed captions or subtitles?
Well, it would be preferable to have as much transcription as possible. Whether or not it's actually legally, the status of the legal requirement, I'm afraid you'd have to answer that one. But really, you should really try and achieve as much transcription as possible, and plan for that in advance. Yeah? It really shouldn't be too difficult, as long as you can. You don't have to do the full lecture. You can shorten the content.
And again, you mentioned about the example from MIT earlier, whereby the audience had a hand in...
Yeah, in that example they used a wiki, so that the content was automatically transcribed, and where it failed to do that, then they had the audience in effect filling that in. But it may be that there's graduate student time available to, just if it's a short series of lectures, they can help with the transcription, because particularly in a scientific topic, automatic transcription might be very, very difficult because it won't recognise the terms.
I'm just thinking back to my own experiences of transcribing some of my scribbled notes as a student, and thinking actually how much the transcription process itself might actually aid learning as well as an integral part of it. I suppose there are times where you wouldn't want to chop up the lecture, and that the one circumstance I suppose I foresee is where you have recorded for quality purposes, whether that be an external quality audit of teaching, and you want to show what happened within the entire hour, then they might get a little suspicious if you've cut it down to the best 15 minutes and what went on out there. But a fairly exceptional situation for that. Turning then to the, and I will mention about transcription as well, there's another practical issue I think that's worthwhile mentioning, and that is that Google is not going to pick up the content of your lecture as an audio or video file, and that may not be important to you, and if it's not, then fine. But if you're making a transcription available through something that Google will pick up, and you have as your object it being further disseminated, then so much the better. That can be a collateral benefit as well. From the legal point of view, as to whether you have to transcribe or provide closed captions to it, it will depend on the purpose for which you're using that material. Your duty is to give all students, including those with disabilities, access to the same learning opportunity, the same learning experience, or an equivalent one. It could be that, for example, if you chose to use background music, I'm a big fan of Girls Aloud, and if you want to use that as your background music, then first you're going to have a big rights clearance issue, but assuming you could get past that, then transcribing the lyrics is unlikely in most situations to lend anything to the learning experience. And I think there'd be a question of what on earth are you up to. And to give an example of that, there's a legal firm here in Glasgow that tried to clear the rights to I Fought the Law, and the law won for the start and end of a podcast, and the bill was going to be around £8,000 for a 10-second slot at the beginning and end. They decided not to bother in the end. So from the IPR point of view, the intellectual property point of view, worthwhile missing out. But where you're looking at the accessibility of the materials for a student with a disability on the one hand, but it might be actually in different situations, it might just be students wishing to consider to learn on the bus using their mobile phone. It could be through a low bandwidth connection somewhere or other in the world. Then making the materials available by different means is certainly worthwhile, and also for suiting different learning styles. So I think for the legal point of view, you're going to have to ask yourself, is someone going to miss out, or could a student with a disability miss out on the learning point of this by not providing a reasonable adjustment? And if that's the case, then yes, you will be required to make available a transcription. If you can make available a transcription on demand with fast enough that it doesn't disadvantage the student, then that's possible. It doesn't necessarily mean one in advance, though there are other good reasons why you might want to do it in advance. And like so with closed captioning, I think again we're saying in this day and age that actually getting this done isn't very expensive, it isn't very difficult, and it may actually form part of the learning experience in some instances.
Something that's worth mentioning very briefly in terms of that is that there are a number of excellent free open source subtitling systems available on the internet. Quite easy to find. If you go to Google and put in subtitles, you'll be quite surprised at what you can find there.
Okay. And certainly YouTube have taken steps forward in terms of captioning of subtitling of videos being uploaded there, if that's the way. And that brings me nicely on to the next question. How do we make the materials available? Sticking them up on the VLE, making them available on a memory stick, sending them out. It's going to depend on the situation and purpose, I think, mainly.
It depends on your audience plan that you had at the outset for that lecture. Although, as you've mentioned, it may be that the purpose of the video recording changes over time because you actually find its content is useful for something else that you never originally thought of.
Absolutely. You may also find that it becomes an institutional decision, not a decision on the part of the lecturer. Yeah. You may have a policy out there.
Yeah, streaming video it gives people more rights over the control of how it's delivered. However, in this day and age, it's quite common for people to take copies of that, and it can appear on YouTube or similar clones. Yeah.
One of the questions we were asked was with regards to how can you protect your materials and making it available. And again, I think that if you want to be protective of your materials and stop people getting to it, then that's going to be another factor that plays into where you make it available and how.
Yeah. Yeah. And even then you have no guarantees. I mean, the problem in this day and age, there's no way you can be absolutely 100 protected your material. You've got to, as I'm sure one of your favorite words, risk enters the equation when you talk about this.
And distributing the content with metadata that describes what it's about is very important in this day and age where there's more and more material out there and you have to wade through more of what you don't want. Anything with good descriptive metadata is likely to be quickly found and therefore much appreciated. There's an opportunity here as well in that the individuals making these recordings have an opportunity to share the story of how they did and what they did, and they can share it through the Higher Education Academy subject network, maybe through the Academy itself, and also through services like JISC Techdis. If they've actually made an advance and it's worthy of a case study, they may even get funding out of it, which therefore could lead on to many other opportunities as well. So sharing the story of the advantages of doing this is very, very important, and that shouldn't be overlooked.
So I suppose post-production, what we're talking about is sitting down for 5 minutes and thinking, how did that go, first of all?
Absolutely, and then maybe actually spending a few hours and getting a paper out of it.
Absolutely.
You know, there are opportunities like our own e-journal at Centre for Bioscience Education, gives people opportunities to write up how they've used video, and anybody searching the subject Centre for Bioscience on its video case studies would find occurrences of that.
There is a question on moving on with licenses and the permissions in law, and it's worthwhile stating that if you get permissions to use other people's material in restricted circumstances, for example, to make it available on the virtual learning environment, then you have to be careful to keep to those purposes. That can be difficult when things move on later, and so it's always worthwhile trying to think about the future. For example, at the moment many projects are grappling with the issue of video that's been recorded beforehand, trying to make it available as an open educational resource. And that is particularly difficult with video because of the layers of rights, as has been mentioned, and trying to get them all cleared for later on. future-proofing is a difficult thing to do. Who knows where we're going to be in 10 years' time? And that's why trying to get the greatest rights might be appropriate in some circumstances, where appropriate. Admittedly, if you're talking about an interview with a patient about a particular medical aspect, then it might be only reasonable in that circumstance to ask for limited rights in terms of copyright and data protection before dissemination. This is not something that you would want to think about 6 months later. We could stick this on YouTube so everyone could learn from it. Might not be such a good idea, obviously. So think about the purposes beforehand, clear the rights, the intellectual property rights, and get the data protection consent at those times at that time for the future purposes, I think is part of that. All right, that brings us to the end of post-production. We still see that there's questions coming in. We're going to have one last quick session to deal with the questions that have come in, and then it will be a quick rounding up, and we'll be finishing just after 3:45.